I woke up to the sound of my neighbors screaming. Not just any neighbor, Karen, you know the type. The kind of person who lives for power trips and has a clipboard permanently glued to her hand. She's the HOA president, and if there's one thing Karen loves more than her perfectly manicured lawn, it's making everyone else's life miserable. It all started when I moved into this quiet suburban neighborhood. At first, everything seemed fine. The houses were nice, the streets were clean, and the neighbors waved hello. But then I met Karen. She showed up at my door on day one with a stack of HOA rules thicker than a dictionary and a smile that screamed, "I'm about to ruin your life." The first red flag was when she told me I couldn't park my truck in my own driveway because it was an eyesore. Excuse me, it's a truck. It's meant to look rugged. But no, Karen had a problem with it. Then she started nitpicking everything. My mailbox was the wrong shade of beige. My hedges were half an inch too tall. And don't even get me started on the time I left my trash cans out for an extra hour. But the real trouble began when she decided my private road was a community concern. Yeah, you heard that right. My private road. The one I paid for, maintain, and have the deed to. Karen claimed it was a safety hazard and blocked it off with one of those obnoxious orange barriers. I asked her what the problem was, and she just smirked and said, "It's for the greater good." That's when I knew this wasn't going to end well. Karen had crossed a line, and I wasn't about to let her get away with it. But I'm not the type to throw a tantrum or start a shouting match. No, I decided to play the long game. I smiled, nodded, and walked away, but in my head, I was already plotting my revenge. Little did Karen know I had a plan. A legal, tactical, and absolutely ridiculous plan. And it all started with a shovel. The next morning, I woke up early, grabbed a cup of coffee, and sat on my porch, staring at that stupid orange barrier blocking my road. Karen had already left for her morning power walk. Yes, she even walks like she owns the neighborhood. So I had some time to think. I wasn't going to just sit back and let her bully me. I needed to hit her where it hurt, her ego and her authority. I started researching. I spent hours online, digging through HOA bylaws, local property laws, and even some obscure zoning regulations. Turns out Karen wasn't as untouchable as she thought. My private road was exactly that, private. The HOA had no jurisdiction over it, and Karen's little blockade was completely illegal. But calling the cops or filing a complaint would have been too easy. I wanted to make a statement. That's when the idea hit me. If Karen wanted to block my road, I'd give her something to really complain about. I called up a contractor friend of mine, Mike, and pitched him my plan. At first, he thought I was joking. "You want to do what?" he asked, laughing. But when I explained the legal loopholes and showed him the paperwork, he was on board. A few days later, a crew showed up at my property with heavy machinery. Karen must have heard the noise because she came storming over, her face red and her clipboard clutched tightly in her hand. "What on earth do you think you're doing?" she screeched, her voice echoing down the street. I smiled calmly and handed her a copy of the property deed and the permits I'd obtained. "Just making some improvements," I said. Her eyes widened as she read through the documents. "You can't do this," she yelled, but her voice wavered. She knew she was beat, at least for now. By the end of the day, a massive trench had been dug around the perimeter of my property, right along the edge of my private road. It was deep, wide, and impossible to cross without a bridge. And that was just phase one. Karen tried to rally the neighborhood against me, holding an emergency HOA meeting that evening. She stood at the front of the room, ranting about how I was destroying the community's aesthetic and creating a safety hazard. But here's the thing. People were starting to see through her. The neighbors were tired of her constant nitpicking and power trips. A few of them even smirked when she brought up the trench. One guy, Jim from down the street, raised his hand and said, "Karen, didn't you block his road first? Seems like he's just returning the favor." The room erupted into laughter, and Karen's face turned beet red. She slammed her clipboard on the table and stormed out, muttering about taking legal action. But I wasn't worried. I had the law on my side and I was just getting started. Karen's threat of legal action didn't scare me. In fact, it only fueled my determination. I knew she'd try something, so I stayed 2 steps ahead. The next morning, I woke up to find a notice taped to my front door. It was from the HOA, of course, demanding I cease and desist all unauthorized construction, or face serious consequences. I rolled my eyes and tossed it in the trash. Later that day, Mike and his crew returned to start Phase 2 of my plan, the Drawbridge. Yes, a drawbridge. It was ridiculous, over the top, and absolutely perfect. As they worked, I made sure to document everything: photos, videos, even drone footage. If Karen wanted to play dirty, I'd have all the evidence I needed to prove I was within my rights. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. People started stopping by to see the progress, and most of them loved it. "This is the best thing that's ever happened here," one neighbor said, laughing as he watched the drawbridge take shape. Even Jim from the HOA meeting came by to offer his support. "Karen's had it coming for years," he said. "You're doing the Lord's work." But Karen wasn't done. A few days later, I received another notice. This time, it was a fine for disrupting the peace and tranquility of the community. The amount was absurd, but I didn't pay it. Instead, I sent a formal letter to the HOA, citing the specific laws and regulations that proved my project was legal. I also included a not-so-subtle reminder that blocking my private road was a violation of my property rights. Karen's response was predictable. She called an emergency HOA board meeting and tried to rally support to have me evicted. But here's where things got interesting. Unbeknownst to her, I'd been quietly talking to other homeowners. Many of them were fed up with Karen's tyranny and the HOA's ridiculous rules. By the time the meeting rolled around, I had a small but growing group of allies. The meeting was chaos. Karen stood at the front, yelling about how I was destroying the neighborhood and setting a dangerous precedent. But when she called for a vote to take legal action against me, the room was divided. Some people sided with her, but others, including Jim and a few others I'd spoken to, stood up for me. "This isn't about the trench or the drawbridge," Jim said. "This is about Karen abusing her power." The vote ended in a tie, which meant no action could be taken. Karen was furious. She stormed out of the meeting, vowing to handle this herself. I knew that meant trouble, but I was ready. The next morning, I woke up to find my drawbridge vandalized. Someone had spray-painted "Stop" in big red letters across it. I didn't need proof to know it was Karen, but I got it anyway. My security cameras caught her sneaking onto my property in the middle of the night, wearing a hoodie and carrying a can of spray paint. I didn't confront her right away. Instead, I posted the footage online, along with a caption that read, "Looks like someone's not a fan of progress." Within hours, the video went viral. People in the neighborhood shared it, and it even made the local news. Karen's reputation was crumbling, and she knew it. But she wasn't going down without a fight. Karen's vandalism stunt backfired spectacularly. The video of her sneaking onto my property with a can of spray paint spread like wildfire. Neighbors who had been on the fence about her started turning against her. Even some of her staunchest supporters couldn't defend her actions. The local news picked up the story, and suddenly, our quiet suburban neighborhood was the talk of the town. Karen went into damage control mode. She called another emergency HOA meeting, this time with a carefully crafted speech about how she'd been framed and how I was manipulating the community. But her theatrics didn't work. People had seen the footage, and they weren't buying her excuses. Meanwhile, I kept pushing forward with my plan. The drawbridge was nearly complete, and it was glorious. It wasn't just functional, it was a statement. A big, bold, in-your-face statement that said, "You can't mess with me." I even added a little flair by painting it in bright colors and installing a small flagpole at the top. Karen tried to hit me with more fines and complaints, but I had an answer for everything. Every notice she sent I countered with legal documentation proving I was within my rights. I even hired a lawyer to send her a cease and desist letter, warning her to stop harassing me or face legal consequences. But Karen wasn't the type to back down. She escalated things in a way I didn't see coming. One morning, I woke up to find a crew of workers on my property, attempting to fill in the trench. I rushed outside, demanding to know what was going on. The foreman shrugged and said, "We were hired by the HOA. They said this was unauthorized construction." I immediately called Mike, who showed up within minutes with his crew. A tense standoff ensued, with both sides arguing over who had the right to be there. I pulled out my phone and started recording, making it clear that any attempt to tamper with my property would be documented and used as evidence. The situation got so heated that someone called the police. When they arrived, Karen showed up too, looking smug as ever. She handed the officers a stack of papers, claiming she had the authority to remove the trench and drawbridge. But when the officers reviewed the documents, they quickly realized Karen was in the wrong. "Ma'am, this is private property," one of the officers said. "You have no jurisdiction here." Karen's face turned red with anger. "But he's destroying the neighborhood," she shouted. The officer shook his head. "That's not for us to decide. If you have a problem, take it to court." Karen was fuming, but she had no choice but to back down. The workers left, and I was free to continue my project. But I knew this wasn't over. Karen wasn't going to let this go, and neither was I. The next twist came a few days later, when I received a letter from the city. Karen had filed a formal complaint, claiming my drawbridge was a public safety hazard and demanding it be removed. The city scheduled an inspection, and if they found the structure to be unsafe, I'd be forced to take it down. I wasn't worried, though. I'd made sure everything was up to code and I had all the necessary permits. But I also knew Karen would try to pull some strings to get the inspection to go her way. So I decided to take things up a notch. I invited the local news to cover the inspection. If Karen wanted to play dirty, I'd make sure the whole world was watching. The day of the city inspection arrived, and it felt like the entire neighborhood was holding its breath. The local news crew showed up early, setting up their cameras and interviewing curious neighbors. Karen was there too, of course, standing off to the side with her arms crossed and a smug look on her face. She clearly thought she had this in the bag. The inspector, a no-nonsense guy named Greg, arrived right on time. He introduced himself, shook my hand, and got straight to work. He examined the drawbridge, checked the trench, and reviewed all the permits and documentation I'd provided. Karen hovered nearby, trying to interject with comments like, "Are you sure that's up to code?" and "Isn't this a safety hazard?" Greg ignored her for the most part, focusing on his job. After about an hour, he called everyone over to share his findings. "Everything checks out," he said. "The structure is safe, and all the necessary permits are in order. There's no reason to remove it." Karen's face fell. But what about the safety concerns?" she stammered. Greg shrugged. "I don't see any. If anything, this is one of the most well-documented and properly executed projects I've seen in a while. The news crew caught every moment of Karen's humiliation, and it didn't take long for the footage to go viral. By the end of the day, the story had made national headlines. People loved the underdog narrative. A regular guy standing up to an overbearing HOA president with a ridiculous but brilliant plan. Karen tried to save face by holding yet another HOA meeting, but this time no one showed up. Even her most loyal supporters had abandoned her. The neighborhood was buzzing with excitement, and for the first time in years, people felt like they had a voice. But Karen wasn't done. Desperate to regain control, she pulled her most underhanded move yet. She called a special election to dissolve the HOA entirely, claiming it was no longer serving the community's best interests. On the surface, it seemed like a good thing. After all, who wouldn't want to get rid of the HOA? But I knew there was more to it. Karen's plan was to dissolve the HOA, wait for the dust to settle, and then form a new one with even stricter rules and more power. She thought she could outsmart everyone, but I wasn't about to let that happen. I called an emergency meeting of my own, inviting everyone in the neighborhood to discuss Karen's proposal. The turnout was huge. People were curious, angry, and ready for change. I stood up and laid out the facts, explaining Karen's true intentions and urging everyone to vote against dissolving the HOA. If we dissolve it now, she'll just come back stronger, I said. But if we keep it, we can reform it. We can make it work for us, not against us. The room erupted into applause, and for the first time, I felt like I had the entire neighborhood behind me. The vote was unanimous. No one wanted to dissolve the HOA. Karen's plan had failed, and she knew it, but she still had one last card to play. Karen's final move was as sneaky as it was predictable. She resigned as HOA president, but not before appointing one of her loyalists to take her place, a guy named Todd, who was just as power-hungry but far less competent. Todd immediately tried to pick up where Karen left off, issuing new fines and complaints in a desperate attempt to assert his authority. But the neighborhood wasn't having it. People were fed up with the constant drama and ready for real change. A group of homeowners, led by Jim and a few others, approached me with an idea. Why not run for HOA president myself? At first, I laughed it off. Me? The guy who dug a trench and built a drawbridge? But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. If I could turn the HOA into something that actually served the community, it would be the ultimate victory. Not just over Karen, but over the entire system she represented. I agreed to run, and the campaign was unlike anything the neighborhood had ever seen. My platform was simple: transparency, fairness, and common sense. No more nitpicking, no more power trips, just a focus on making the neighborhood a better place for everyone. Karen and Todd tried to sabotage my campaign, spreading rumors and even accusing me of illegal construction practices. But their efforts backfired. The more they attacked me, the more people rallied behind me. By the time Election Day arrived, it wasn't even close. I won by a landslide. My first act as HOA president was to call a meeting and lay out my vision for the future. "This isn't about me," I said. "It's about all of us. We're going to work together to make this neighborhood a place we're proud to call home." The response was overwhelming. People were excited, engaged, and ready to pitch in. We formed committees to address issues like landscaping, security, and community events. For the first time in years, the HOA felt like it was working for the people, not against them. But Karen wasn't done causing trouble. Even though she was no longer in power, she couldn't resist stirring the pot. She started a blog criticizing every decision I made and accusing me of being a tyrant in disguise. It was ridiculous, but it got under my skin. Then, one day, I got a call from Jim. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "Karen's selling her house." I was shocked. Karen had lived in the neighborhood for decades, and I never thought she'd leave. But apparently, the constant backlash and loss of power had finally gotten to her. She put her house on the market and moved out within weeks. With Karen gone, the neighborhood felt lighter, like a dark cloud had lifted. But I knew better than to think our problems were over. There would always be challenges, but for the first time, we were facing them together. And as for the drawbridge, it became a symbol of our victory, a reminder that sometimes standing up for what's right requires a little creativity and a lot of determination. With Karen gone and the neighborhood finally at peace, I thought the drama was over. But life has a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect it. A few weeks after Karen moved out, a new family moved into her old house. They seemed nice enough, a young couple with 2 kids and a golden retriever. I welcomed them to the neighborhood, hoping they'd bring some fresh energy to the community. But then I met Greg, the husband. He was friendly at first, but there was something about him that felt off. He asked a lot of questions about the HOA, the drawbridge, and the history of the neighborhood. At first, I thought he was just curious, but then he started making comments that made me uneasy. "You know, that drawbridge is pretty cool," he said one day, "but don't you think it's a bit excessive? I mean, it's not exactly neighborly, is it?" I shrugged it off, but his comments kept coming. He started suggesting changes to the HOA bylaws, like stricter rules for home improvements and higher fees for non-compliant homeowners. It didn't take long for me to realize that Greg was cut from the same cloth as Karen. He just had a nicer smile. Things came to a head at the next HOA meeting. Greg stood up and proposed a new rule that would require all non-essential structures to be approved by a majority vote of the HOA board. It was a thinly veiled attempt to target my drawbridge, and everyone knew it. The room erupted into arguments. Some people supported Greg, saying the neighborhood needed more uniformity. Others, including Jim and most of the original supporters of my campaign, argued that the proposal was just another power grab. I tried to keep the peace, but it was clear that Greg was trying to divide the neighborhood. He even brought up Karen's old complaints, claiming that my drawbridge was a safety hazard and a blight on the community. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't want to stoop to his level. Instead, I decided to take the high road. I proposed a compromise. Instead of requiring a vote for every home improvement, we'd create a committee to review projects on a case-by-case basis. The committee would be made up of homeowners, not just HOA board members, to ensure fairness and transparency. The proposal passed, but Greg wasn't happy. He started spreading rumors about me, claiming I was abusing my power and ignoring the will of the people. It was frustrating, but I tried to stay focused on the bigger picture. Then, one morning, I woke up to find my drawbridge vandalized again. This time, someone had spray-painted "Tyrant" in big, bold letters across the side. I didn't need proof to know it was Greg, but I got it anyway. My security cameras caught him sneaking onto my property in the middle of the night, wearing a hoodie and carrying a can of spray paint. I didn't confront him right away. Instead, I called a special meeting of the HOA board and presented the footage. The room was silent as everyone watched Greg's betrayal play out on the screen. Greg tried to deny it, but the evidence was undeniable. "I was just trying to make a point," he said, his voice shaking. "This neighborhood needs real leadership, not some guy with a ridiculous drawbridge." The room erupted into chaos. People were shouting, arguing, and demanding answers. I stood up and called for order. "This isn't about me or the drawbridge. I said. "This is about who we want to be as a community. Do we want to be divided by petty arguments and power struggles, or do we want to come together and build something better?" The room fell silent. One by one, people started nodding in agreement. Even Greg looked ashamed. But the drama wasn't over yet. As the meeting ended, Greg stormed out, muttering about taking this to the next level. I didn't know what that meant, but I knew I had to be ready for whatever came next. Greg's threat of taking this to the next level hung over the neighborhood like a dark cloud. I didn't know what he was planning, but I knew it wouldn't be good. I spent the next few days on high alert, keeping an eye on my property and staying in close contact with Jim and the rest of the HOA board. Then, one evening, I got a call from Jim. "You need to see this," he said, his voice tense. He sent me a link to a local news article, and my heart sank. The headline read, "Suburban Neighborhood Divided Over Controversial Drawbridge." The article was a hit piece, full of half-truths and outright lies. It painted me as a power-hungry tyrant who was holding the neighborhood hostage with my bizarre and unnecessary drawbridge. It even quoted Greg, who claimed I was abusing my position as HOA president to silence dissent. I was furious, but I knew I had to stay calm. I called a press conference for the next morning, inviting the same news outlet that had written the article. When the reporter showed up, I handed her a folder full of documents, permits, photos, and a timeline of events that showed the real story. "I'm not here to defend myself," I said. "I'm here to set the record straight. This drawbridge isn't about me. It's about standing up to bullies and fighting for what's right. If that makes me a tyrant, then so be it." The reporter looked embarrassed as she flipped through the documents. I didn't realize there was so much more to the story," she admitted. The corrected article came out the next day, and this time it was on my side. It highlighted the neighborhood's struggle against Karen and Greg's underhanded tactics, and it even included quotes from supportive neighbors. But Greg wasn't done. He started a petition to have me removed as HOA president, claiming I was unfit to lead. He went door to door, gathering signatures and spreading more lies. Some people signed it, but most saw through his nonsense. Then, one night, I got a call from a neighbor who lived near Greg. "You need to come over here," she said, her voice shaking. "Greg's doing something weird." I grabbed my phone and headed over. When I arrived, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Greg was in his driveway, loading a bunch of HOA documents into his car. He looked up and saw me, and for a moment we just stared at each other. "What are you doing?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Greg hesitated, then smirked. "Just cleaning house," he said. "These documents are a mess. Someone needs to take charge." I didn't buy it for a second. I called the police, and when they arrived, Greg tried to play it off as a misunderstanding. But when the officers searched his car, they found more than just documents. They found evidence that Greg had been embezzling HOA funds. It was a bombshell. Greg was arrested on the spot, and the neighborhood was in shock. I spent the next few days working with the police and the HOA board to sort through the mess Greg had left behind. It was a lot of work, but it was worth it to see justice served. But even with Greg gone, the neighborhood wasn't out of the woods yet. The embezzlement scandal had left the HOA's finances in shambles, and we had to make some tough decisions to get back on track. Then, one day, I got a letter in the mail. It was from Karen. Karen's letter was short and to the point. She wanted to meet. Not in the neighborhood, of course, somewhere neutral. She suggested a coffee shop downtown, and I agreed, partly out of curiosity and partly because I wanted to see what she had to say. When I walked into the coffee shop, Karen was already there, sitting at a corner table with a cup of tea. She looked different, smaller somehow, like the fight had been drained out of her, but there was still a glint of determination in her eyes. "Thanks for coming," she said as I sat down. I nodded. "What's this about, Karen?" She took a deep breath. "I know we've had our differences," she began, "but I think it's time we put the past behind us. The neighborhood is in trouble, and I want to help." I raised an eyebrow. "Help how?" Karen leaned forward, her voice low. "I know about Greg's embezzlement. I also know he wasn't working alone. There's a bigger problem here, and if we don't address it, the whole neighborhood could collapse." I was skeptical, but I couldn't ignore the urgency in her voice. "What are you talking about?" Karen explained that Greg had been part of a larger scheme involving several HOAs in the area. They'd been siphoning funds for years, using the money to finance shady real estate deals. Karen had stumbled onto the truth while researching her own legal troubles, and she'd been gathering evidence ever since. "I didn't want to believe it at first," she admitted. "But the more I dug, the more I realized how deep this goes. Greg was just a small piece of the puzzle." I sat back, trying to process what she was saying. "Why are you telling me this now?" Karen looked down at her hands. "Because I was wrong," she said quietly. "I let my ego get in the way, and I hurt a lot of people. This is my chance to make things right." I didn't know whether to believe her, but I couldn't ignore the evidence she'd gathered. We spent the next hour going over everything: bank statements, emails, even recordings of phone calls. It was overwhelming, but it was also undeniable. "What do you want me to do?" I asked finally. Karen looked me in the eye. "I want you to take this to the authorities. You're the HOA president now. They'll listen to you." I agreed, but I knew it wouldn't be easy. We spent the next few days preparing our case, working late into the night to organize the evidence and draft a formal complaint. It was strange working with Karen, but I had to admit she was good at this. When we finally submitted the complaint, the authorities took it seriously. An investigation was launched, and within weeks several high-profile figures were arrested, including a city council member and a prominent real estate developer. The neighborhood was stunned. People couldn't believe that something like this had been happening right under their noses. But as the truth came out, there was also a sense of relief. Finally, the corruption was being exposed, and we could start to rebuild. But the drama wasn't over yet. Just as things were starting to settle down, I got a call from Jim. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "Karen's back." Karen's return to the neighborhood was met with mixed reactions. Some people were wary, remembering all the trouble she'd caused in the past. Others were willing to give her a second chance, especially after her role in exposing the corruption. I decided to meet with her again, this time at my house. She looked nervous as she sat on my porch sipping a glass of iced tea. "I know I don't deserve it," she said, "but I'd like to come back. This neighborhood is my home, and I want to help make it better." I thought about it for a long time. Karen had done a lot of damage, but she'd also played a key role in uncovering the truth. Maybe she deserved a chance to start over. "Okay," I said finally, "but there are conditions. You'll have to earn people's trust back, and that won't be easy. You'll also have to follow the rules. No more power trips, no more nitpicking. Deal?" Karen nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Deal." Over the next few months, Karen kept her word. She volunteered for neighborhood cleanups, helped organize community events, and even apologized to the people she'd wronged. It wasn't easy, but slowly, she started to rebuild her reputation. As for me, I continued to serve as HOA president, but my approach was different now. I focused on collaboration and transparency, making sure everyone had a voice in the decisions that affected the neighborhood. The drawbridge became a symbol of our resilience, a reminder that even the most ridiculous ideas can lead to something great if you're willing to fight for what's right. The neighborhood flourished. People were happier, more engaged, and proud to be part of a community that stood up to corruption and embraced change. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. A moral lesson. The story teaches us that standing up to injustice requires courage, creativity, and persistence. It's not always easy, and there will be setbacks along the way, but with patience and determination, even the most entrenched systems of power can be challenged and changed. It also reminds us that people are capable of growth and redemption, and that sometimes the best way to move forward is to give others a chance to make things right. In the end, it's not about winning battles. It's about building a community where everyone has a voice and a place to belong.